a ton of agents. I mean, a lot of agents. And I see some really good ones. I see some really bad ones. And I'll be happy to steer you to a rock star real estate agent who has all of these strategies, but most importantly has the knowledge and the experience to allow you to benefit from them. So a reverse contingency may allow you to step out as a seller into this market and capitalize on this high equity position that you're in and move without the risk of, being stuck without a house. So I throw that out there as an option for sellers. So consider that. If you have any questions, give us a call. 561-291-8569 rings at my office when we're not on the air. But I'll be happy to get you in touch with somebody that can help or better explain that. But yeah, thought that was interesting. Reverse contingencies for a seller in this market. So as promised, we're going to dive into some questions. I'm going to throw it over to Dom, my producer, and see what we have queued up for questions. Hey, Dom.
All right. We have Caesar from Palm Springs. Caesar said, I just bought a townhouse and my closing costs were way more than I thought. My broker explained why, but I still don't understand. Do you know why my closing costs were higher? I feel like I'm missing something.
Hey, Caesar, that's a great question. And just for clarity, everybody listening, Caesar's not a client of the Mr. Mortgage team, because if he was, he would know exactly what his closing cost numbers are. Now, I say that in jest, but honestly, a lot of people find this super confusing. So we tend to lump, there's three, I guess, let me back up. There are three categories to what we call in the industry as your cash to close. A lot of people lump all those together and call them closing costs. So in those three categories, there are a lot of variables. The most controllable variable is your down payment, which is super simple math, right? You're going to buy a property and you qualify for a 90% loan. So 10% down payment, let's say it's a $400,000 house. That's $40,000. That's super easy math. But that's only one component of what is classed as your cash to close. The other two, buckets that make up that number, that cash to close, that number that you have to wire to the closing company to actually, close the transaction, consists of closing costs, which, as we mentioned, is usually the generic term we use for all three of these buckets. But the closing costs are things like your title insurance, the title charges for closing the transaction. A closing cost could be an inspection, an appraisal cost, all of the services, if you will, that need to be enacted and completed on your behalf to legally transfer the property from you, or from the seller rather, to you, Caesar, as the buyer. So one of those is a transfer tax. When you buy property in Florida, the state charges a tax on that transfer. The state charges us a tax on everything, but there are transfer taxes that are associated with it. So that's what we would call, I guess, for lack of a better word, a hard closing cost. And there are several items in that bucket. Some, or actually most of them, can be negotiated. Some are percentages of the purchase price, like the state taxes. You can't negotiate with the tax man. We all know that. But anyway, the third category in the quote unquote closing cost, or cash to close rather, is prepaids or your escrows. So most of the time when you get a mortgage, part of that payment each month goes into an escrow account, and the lender is holding that money in escrow so you can pay, or they can pay, I guess, on your behalf. You're technically paying it, but they're doing it for you, your taxes and your insurance when it renews. So that really is your money. However, you have to seed your escrow account. So in Florida, taxes are paid in November. The escrow account has to be liquidated to pay taxes in November, because that's the biggest discount you get as a Florida taxpayer as far as real estate's concerned. So in order to get the biggest discount, the escrow account is set up to have enough money in it November 1st to pay your taxes. The second thing the escrow has to pay is your insurance. Also, too, you pay your first year's insurance in advance. So if your insurance policy is $3,000 a year on your property, or $4,000, we're seeing some higher insurance rates of late. You're going to pay that first year up front. That's a prepaid. And then you're going to, depending on your loan program, you're going to either put, 2 to 4 months in escrow. So you may pay 14 to 16 months of insurance up front, and you're going to seed your escrow account with that percent, the number of months rather, for taxes that are required for November's tax bill to be paid. So that may be what happened to you, Caesar. You may have gone into this transaction knowing what your down payment percentage was going to be and probably had a decent idea of what your closing costs would be, but maybe the escrows are what got you wrapped around the axle. I'm not sure without seeing your closing statement and your original loan disclosures. I'm happy to review those for you and explain them, but just know that there are distinct differences in what we call closing costs and the overall cash to close. And cash to close, that number is comprised of the down payment, the prepaid items, which I mentioned are taxes and insurance, and your hard quote unquote closing costs. So all of that together is the number that you need to bring to the closing table to end up walking away with the keys to the property. So I hope that helps. I know a lot of people get super confused when they see a big number and we just call it closing costs and it throws them for a loop. So we'll be back on the other side of this break, and I encourage more and more questions. 561-291-8569, 561-291-8569, or as always, www.mr.mortgage. There's never a .com. Just type in mr.mortgage. Hey, it's Mark Eitel here, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show. And you've heard me talk about the valuation tool that we use in our lending practice almost daily. It's not quite an appraisal, but it's way more accurate than one of those online estimates. And we're happy to run one of those reports for you at no charge. Just visit freevaluereport.org. That's freevaluereport.org. Give us a little information about the property, and we'll be happy to send you your report. That's freevaluereport.org.
Here's another 5-star review.
We started our loan with a different company. They said we were approved, but at the last minute they told us there was a problem. I still don't know what went wrong, but thankfully our real estate agent told us about Mark. I was pretty stressed, but it's the perfect house, so we gave Mark a shot. He got it done. I'm not sure what was different, but I don't really care. We even got a better interest rate and with less money out of pocket than the first guy quoted us. It was a great surprise. Yes, I'm happy to recommend Mark and his Mr. Mortgage team.
It's not every day that you need an appraisal, whether it's for a divorce settlement, estate planning, or maybe you're appealing a tax assessment, or you just want to make sure you have adequate coverage in your property insurance. When you need a certified appraisal, turn to my friends at soflappraisal.com. That's soflappraisal.com. Peter and his team have been appraising properties here in South Florida for decades. soflappraisal.com. And tell them you heard this on the Mr. Mortgage Show.
Are inflation and everyday expenses eating into your retirement income? Maybe you've considered a reverse mortgage and have unanswered questions like, do I still own my property? Can the bank kick me out? What happens when I die? Can I still leave my house to my kids? These are all great questions. Visit www.moreaboutreverse.com to learn more. That's www.moreaboutreverse.com. www.moreaboutreverse.com.
Welcome back to the Mr. Mortgage Show. Call us now, 561-291-8569.
Yes, do that. Give us a call, 561-291-8569. That's 561-291-8569. If you're shy like me and you don't want to hear your voice on the air, then just text us those questions. Dom, my producer, is manning the board and watching out for questions. And as always, hit the website, www.mr.mortgage. That's mr.mortgage, no .com. And there you can submit your questions through the website also. And speaking of questions, I know Dom has given me the finger. Well, no, not giving me the finger, but he's holding up his finger. He has a question for us. So take it away, Dom.
All right, we have Jim from Weston. He says, you talk about a special loan for investors. Will this loan work if it's my first rental property?
Hey, Jim. I think I know the loan you're talking about. We went into great detail about a loan product that we call a DSCR loan. And yes, to answer your question, if that's the loan you're speaking of, it does work for first-time investors. So I know a lot, and that's a great question, by the way. I know a lot of quote-unquote investor loans do prefer people that are seasoned, if you will, owning and managing property. And part of the traditional investor loan, if you will, requires the DSCR, or let me explain that, the debt service coverage ratio. And that's the amount of money over and above the expenses of the building each month, or the apartment or the house, versus the rent. There's a ratio there. And typically a lender wants to see there be a surplus of rent money, more so than just the expenses. So a typical DSCR, or debt service coverage ratio, is 1.25. So on $1,000 a month payment, you're going to want to have $1,250 a month income for that to be considered even. Anything short of that, the bank typically would look to you as the investor to be able to make up that difference with analyzing your income and your assets. One of the cool things that this rapidly appreciating market has brought us is a new portfolio, if you will, of non-QM DSCR loans. So there is a wonderful new program out there that allows that ratio to actually be negative, which I don't ever recommend, but you could buy a property and have a negative debt service coverage ratio. Let's use that example again. You could have a $750 a month rent against a $1,000 a month payment, and it still technically qualify for the program. Again, I don't recommend it. There's additional requirements. And I guess where it would make sense is if you were buying a property that was in need of rehab and was under rent or under market value for whatever reason, and you knew with little effort or money that you could go in there and bring the rents up so that you were positive cash flow. In that instance, it makes a lot of sense now that I think about it out loud. But typically that 1.25% ratio is what they were all looking for. Now there's a 1-to-1 ratio. So that $1,000 a month payment against $1,000 a month rent income, you're even. And the lender is not looking to you, even as a first-time investor, any farther than assets and credit score. So they want to see that you have the assets to put the money down on the property. Typically, 20%, some as low as 15%, but move into a DSCR program thinking about 20% down. And they want to see you have some reserves because you may need to get into the property and do a bit of renovation, or there might be a lag time before you're collecting rent if it's not yet occupied. And you can use a projected rent also. But that being said, to answer your question, yes, a brand new first time, if you will, investor can use a DSCR loan. And they're an amazing opportunity, especially in this market. So it's interesting because typically we don't consider buying an asset at a peak a good decision, right? You're going to watch for a dip in the stock market, and then you're going to score that Google stock you've been watching, or that Amazon. We buy on the dip, sell on the peak is, the old adage. But as we mentioned earlier in the show, there's still a ton of pressure in real estate. And more importantly, from an investor standpoint, a ton of pressure in rent increases. So we had referenced that the reporting website Zumper a couple shows ago, and the Zumper, I'm doing this from memory, but the average 3-bedroom rent in the West Palm Beach metro on Zumper was $2,855 a month, or $2,815, somewhere around there, over $2,800 a month. And this number I do remember, over 60% of the landlords that were surveyed in that report said that they plan on increasing the rent 5 to 10% upon next renewal. So don't get caught up for a moment on the appreciation and say, okay, I missed a 30% appreciation cycle, which would have been awesome, right, as a landlord to buy 2 years ago. But think about it from the opportunity to collect rent in this environment. All of these people who can't buy homes, they're renting homes. And more so now than ever before are the population of renters to owners. So if you're able to capitalize in the market as an investor, I think it's a wonderful opportunity, especially with some of these non-QM investor products. More specifically, the DSCR loan allows you a tremendous amount of flexibility as a brand new investor to go out there and take down some, buy a fourplex. How awesome would that be to buy a fourplex with a DSCR loan, put 20% down, and you're instantly a landlord with the opportunity to, increase rents steadily over the foreseeable future. So I just think